Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us at the Leadership and Innovation Lab. Today is the International Architecture and Urban Planning Conference. So, this is called the theme, the human fabric, bridging architectural design and urban economics. So, cities today are being reshaped by forces that go far beyond aesthetics. How we design buildings around human needs, how we move people efficiently through transit systems, and how we build smarter, more sustainable urban environments for the future. So, this session is going to dig into the real conversations happening at the intersection of design and economics, what it means to put people at the center of architecture, how sustainable development decisions get made and funded, how CAD tools are transforming the design process itself, how transit infrastructure shapes daily life in a city, and what smart really means when applied to urban planning. So, we're going to discover how architects and urban planners are redesigning cities around people and how design decisions and economic realities intersect to shape the future of urban life. So, we'll have a couple of speakers today, both professional experts and students. So I'm going to start off by passing things off to Aubrey, who's going to be our first expert, and she will give you a full rundown of who she is, what she does, and why you are very lucky to be listening to her right now.
Oh,
Over
thank
to
you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Can you see my screen? Okay, great. I have a thumbs up. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. I'm really excited to speak with you and excited to speak on the topic of international architecture and urban planning. I've been a professional planner for a number of years now. I've worked in planning for 20 years, and I'm really excited to talk to you about something that I get very excited about, but as a transportation planner, it may not trickle into everyone. So I'm hoping that the content will be very interesting. Um, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how governmental policy shapes the way that the buildings pop up around us. Again, this is near and dear to my heart. So here's my professional bio. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I work at a company called Arcadis, where I'm the senior project lead for the transportation and mobility advisory group. So what I want to get through today, we're going to talk about planning law in Ontario. So quick question and bonus points to anyone who puts this in the chat. Um, where is Ontario? Does anyone know the biggest city in Ontario? Give me some details about Ontario because I believe we're an international group. And I would love to hear from you. It's also, I'm trying to get a little interactive here, so it's a good test to see if the chat or the Q&A portion works and if I can see it. Um, I don't know if I will see it. But yes, so that's question number one. We're going to talk a bit about planning law. This is my bread and butter, and I hope you get as excited about it as we transportation planners do. We'll talk about the provincial planning statement. Oh, I see chat coming in. This is great. Um, and what that means. Yes, Canada. Well, it does say Canada there, but I'm excited for the enthusiasm. Thank you very much. Um, can you see the chat on the screen that you're looking at? I'm wondering if it's showing the window or the screen, if you know what I mean. No one can see the chat that I just put over top of the slides, so that's great. That's what I want. So now I can see any chat responses. So I will type in here, I see responses. Okay. Um, all right, we're going to talk about the provincial planning statement and specifically section 2.4.2. So, Jack, to tell you about this, it's about MTSAs. We're going to get into what that means. And then we're going to talk about 5 examples of early MTSA plans. The PPS is a fairly new planning document. It's from 2024. So there's some early adopters right now. And then we'll talk a little bit about equity considerations. And I hope to turn you all into transportation planners from this conversation. A little bit about me. I'm from a small town. It's called Woodstock, Ontario, not the Woodstock that had the concert in the 60s. Here's a picture of me and my brother. He just sent that to me this week, so I'm just in love with his picture, so I put it there. So my brother and I grew up together in a small town, and I've always had a fascination with cities. When I was a kid for my birthday, we got to pick a city that was driving distance and go to it. So leaving my small town, which was close to cows. I got to move on to cities and check them out, and we got to stay over in a hotel, swim in the pool, greatest thing of my life as a kid, and that created a love for cities in me. Then I decided to move to the University of Toronto for my studies, where I got 2 degrees. I got a degree in environmental management and a degree in urban planning. So the two papers that I wrote, so one for my undergrad thesis and for my graduate thesis are listed there. So my undergraduate thesis was about the mobilization of heavy metals due to roadway applications of sodium chloride. So exciting. It's about how you put one chemical on the road, it could have negative impacts to other chemicals that are sort of hidden in the soil, and sodium chloride is road salt. And there are other types of chloride as well. Coles notes the chloride itself was the problem. And that was my undergraduate thesis. And then for my master's thesis, I looked at planning for groundwater fed municipalities. So some municipalities pipe from lakes, and other municipalities pipe from the ground. And I was looking at municipalities that pipe from the ground and what their long-term plans are. So if you notice, with the little tidbits about me first, I'm really interested in water. So I worked at the University of Toronto for 8 years when I finished my degree, and I worked in the sustainability office there. And one of my big learnings there was about participation and how that provides opportunity. So I did a lot of work with students. I had about 50 students that I employed in my department to do projects around the campus. I taught some courses. And that was like a kernel of learning that I carried with me into my life, similar to the two theses before and my fascination with cities. So building on that, I then got another job after those 8 years for a company called Metrolinx. And Metrolinx is the transportation planning organization for Ontario, which we've already talked about is in Canada, in sort of the Toronto area. And when I worked at Metrolinx for 12 years, I did lots of different cool things and I became a leader there. But really illuminating that the more sustainable way for people to act might actually be the easier and more affordable option, but people don't know about their options and sort of get stuck. So that was a learning that I had when I worked at Metrolinx. Um, then I became a mom. I'm a mom of 2 kids. They're 7 and 11, and they're awesome kids. And one of my big learnings from that was that all plans need flexibility. You can't have too many plans when you're a mom because things change. And then I started at Arcadis, which is for the first time working in what we call the private sector, which means you work for a business, where the ones before, so the blue ones, University of Toronto and Metrolinx, were both government agencies. So very different type of work when you work for a business. And I'm learning a lot right now. And one of the big things I'm learning is budget realities behind the planning work that we do. In the public sector, you don't really see or you don't really get exposed to a lot of those things. So working in the private sector for this last year, I've really enjoyed and been challenged by understanding budget realities that go behind a lot of the planning that gets done. I'll tell you a little bit about Arcadis. Let's see, 5 points for anyone who can say what country this map is first. So we'll see who gets those points. And you have to put it in the chat or the Q&A. I'm not quite sure which one we see. So Arcadis, thank you. Yes, Canada, hooray. It's a huge landmass. Everyone should know what Canada looks like. Um, and the company I work for is in 30 plus countries, so it's all over the world. There's 34,000 people that work there, giant mega company. I work in one of the Canadian offices, and as you can see, there's a lot of Canadian offices. The one I work for is sort of at the bottom of the point. That's where Toronto is, the largest city in Canada. And it's a money-making company. They've been around since they've been around 135 years, and they're based out of the Netherlands, so in Holland. And every year, the Canadian office does about 40,000 annual projects. So we help municipalities out with problems that they're having. And I work on the transportation side. So a municipality is going to have problems and we're going to be there to help them out. And they hire us to help them out. So it's a really cool organization. I hope you check them out. They're always looking for interns and students, and opportunities abound in our many, many offices around the world. Um, okay, so I want to talk to you about government policy that's shaping the way buildings pop up. I will talk about what I know, which is sort of the Toronto area, but I'm sure a lot of these planning principles work in many places around the world. I'm going to go into a little bit of planning background. So buckle up. This might be a bit dry, but for those of you who are budding transportation planners, I hope you like it as much as me. So a bit about planning law in Ontario. So once upon a time, there were two different planning documents, and these were long-stead planning documents that led what we were going to do in the Ontario province, which some people might call a state. So there were two documents that one was the growth plan and the other one was the provincial policy statement. And both of those governed how things would change and they would get updated from time to time to identify new sort of planning opportunities. In 2024, they got smooshed together into one document called the provincial planning statement. And in that, there were a bunch of new planning rules and laws, and it was a much more condensed version for planning. So there was a lot less black and white, a lot of gray area about the how. It's a very truncated document from what those two once were. Um, so another way that the planning works in Ontario is there's the provincial, or we'll call them state or provincial statutes. For us, that's the Planning Act, which created the provincial planning statement in 2024 and the previous planning documents. And then there's the municipality, the cities get involved, and they take direction from those larger Ontario body plans, and they get updated every 5 years. The municipality makes their changes. And then to enact those changes that the municipality or the city puts in, there's something called land use control instruments, which are things like zoning bylaws, inclusionary zoning, which is like zoning for housing affordability and equity. There's municipal zoning orders that can sort of change that 5-year wait period that municipalities have set up. So that's your 101 class in planning in about 2 minutes. So I'm going to talk to you about one of those planning documents called, or one of the pieces of the PPS, which is about strategic growth areas and major transit station areas. So again, this is section 2.4.2, and has been like a reason to be excited about planning for a number of years. Why? They're all the stuff's here on the screen. I'm not going to read you the vision. You can read that on your own. But in a nutshell, it says that in a 500 to 800 meter radius around a transit station, you have to maximize the number of potential transit users in walking distance. This is something that we've been wanting planning documents to do for a while. You should be walking to the bus, not driving and parking in front of the bus. And you should take the bus, so let's make sure they're all walking distance from home. Then we also wanted to increase density. So that's 150 to 200 residents or jobs per hectare. And in non-Canadian, that's about 2.5 acres. So really growing that density. And then another excerpt from the planning document is to support the redevelopment of surface parking lots within the major transit station area, which is that radius, including any commuter parking lots. So any lots that people would drive, park, get on transit, and go, those commuter parking lots were now available for development. So this is the heyday for transportation planners. These are things that we've been asking for 10 years, and now it's become provincial law. It was a very exciting time, and a lot of us are waiting to see what the response is. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how it hasn't been perfect. And then we'll talk about why. So first of all, I'm going to give you some examples about MTSAs in development today. And there's a lot of images here, not a lot of text, and a lot of stuff from Google. So you're welcome to Google things on your own, but that's what we have in store. But first off, There's a really great data analyst called Stefan Velasco who does really great maps. And the map here shows new developments. So the red, if you can see red and blue, the red and blue are things that are in plan or things that are being developed right now. And anything in gray is existing. So you can see there's a lot of growth and happening. This is post PPS. Things have blown up in the city of Toronto. There's just over 3 million people in the city of Toronto, so it's big, but not that big. We also have the Greater Toronto Area, which is about 8 million people, but like down in this the city core, there's a lot of density that's in plan. This has a lot to do with the MTSA policies saying that you need to be around transportive areas, and a lot of this stuff is very transportive. You can see there's sort of a line going up to the top that is along a subway line or a metro line, and then around the bottom, that line is a commuter rail service. And then I'm going to talk about a specific case study that was fascinating, and it's off the screen. To like the far right, because these are popping up where all the transit stations go. And in case you're wondering where I am right now, I'm just above where the word case is under case study. So I'm off the map, but that's where I am right now at this moment in my house. So the Danforth MTSA is a fascinating study. I'm going to talk to you about it in about 3 or 4 slides. So first of all, again, the stuff that's in gray is existing today. And you can see when the MTSA plan was enacted, a bunch of development was proposed. So there's the blue ones are all under construction, and then the red ones are proposed. This is a significant amount of development in what was like a bedroom community before, small, like low density housing, like single family dwellings. Boom, a bunch of towers are planned for this area, completely transforming this area that just had 3 sort of mid-rises, and now it's going to have high rises, a huge transition of the community. What makes this special are the 2 transit stations. Can you see my cursor on the screen? Yes, okay, great. I'm just going to move the chat over then. Okay, so we have Main Street right here, which is the metro or subway station. And then right here is the commuter rail line, which you can see sort of follows this path. This is like a train track. So there's 2 very busy transit stations, which makes this an ideal MTSA. But there are some issues with the developments that I want to talk about. Okay, so this is the fancy rendering of what that development looks like. The transit station is sort of over this hill, and then the commuter rail line is sort of this line right here. You can see that there's a pretend train right here. This is not actually what trains look like in the city, but it kind of runs here, picks people up along here, and here's another view of it. Now, a couple interesting things about this station. First of all, the transit station had a walking path that has been cut off from this development. So basically, the entrance to the transit station was taken away in the plans for this new development. So even though it's celebrating transit and sitting next to transit with a lot of housing saying you'll be steps from transit, the plan had no entrance anymore other than walking all the way around the neighborhood to the other side of the train tracks to get on. So that walkway is sort of in this spot where this one is here, but it shows, ability to walk to the street. But you actually need to walk along this pathway to get around behind the building to get to the transit station. And I can show you what it sort of looks like today. So today, this is what it looks like. It's a very busy train station. People walk along this ramp to go down, and this entire ramp has been taken over by a building in the new development. And no one said anything until my team, we noticed this, and we said, well, how are we supposed to get these people into the train station? Because this area right here is under an easement to the landowner. So we had to pay for a new entrance. It's a whole debacle. But I would say that's an MTSA done wrong. You have to have this transit area and it welcome people into it, but this transit area was sort of completely separated from the people who lived in the building, and that's a bit of a trend. The Toronto Development Pipeline, there is more than 2,400 residential projects happening in the city of Toronto, tons of cranes in the air. So it's an interesting place, and that means it's attracting a lot of attention from development. All right, I will move on to another case study. This is Georgetown Go. It's outside of the city of Toronto, and the Go station is behind this building. And this is a new development that's proposed on a site next to a very busy train station. It's beautiful. I mean, anyone here from the architecture side, both of these buildings that I've shown you have been gorgeous, impressive, I want to live there type buildings. But they are advertising themselves to be steps from the GO station. So this one is next to the transit station around the back. But one of the big problems that we had noticed was that the front of the whole experience is on the opposite side of the transit station that's supposed to be celebrating. So if you get off the train, you're actually at the dingy, dark, dirty backside of the building, and you have to walk all the way around the building to get to the front door. So again, this is the train station down here at the bottom, and the development is over top of this old factory, and the entrance and exit didn't exist between this side on this side of the building. Then this is what's going to be torn down, and this new fancy one's going to be put in. The entrance is and the gateway of the building is all on this side, and the actual part that connects didn't even have a sidewalk. So we went in and said, no, you need to put a sidewalk in there. So it took a lot of negotiation because sidewalks cost money and it required redesign. So it was a fascinating case. I'll move on because I see I'm going to run out of time. Another interesting case study here is a proposed development in Oakville in Canada. It looks great. Like, this is high density. It looks like a great neighborhood. But the transit station is not here. The transit station, which is supposed to be walkable to these new developments, is way over here. So it's this side and this side. It is sort of the train. This is the train track. So everyone who lives in these new fancy developments that are being encouraged through this density planning, they have to walk a significant difference over a very busy road to get to the transit station that they're supposed to be celebrating. So it's kind of separated from the actual transit that has been set up for it to be satisfied by. Thank you. Good to know I have time. I just find these things so fascinating, and um, it's all well-intentioned. We're creating communities, but maybe there's something that could be done to really celebrate the walking distance from the apartment buildings or the new condos to the transit station, which will have high-speed commuter rail, frequent bus that goes all over the city, plus a mobility hub that includes things like bike share and car hubs and secure bike parking and all the great stuff is actually quite far away from where the people will be living. But that's not all bad. So I'll share with you sort of a good example that I'm really excited about, which is in the city of Brampton. So Brampton is trying to put itself forward as a place for business and innovation. So they've created what they're calling the Brampton Innovation District. And the transit station, this line right here that you kind of can't, oh, I'm not pointing at the right one. The line, sorry, I'm moving. This line right here is the train line. The train station is up here. And all of this is being redeveloped to bring in industry and innovation centers, including campuses, university campuses, and some tech type stuff. So the intention in the future is that it will look like a very busy, bustling, tech-savvy area that's centered around the high-order transit that's in the area. And I think this is a very exciting plan, and I'd love to see how it comes about. There's also a new light rail transit that's coming along this line. So there'll be like a train line and a train line that intersect right in this innovation district, and will make it really easy for people to move around and to get there as a destination, and also for people who live there as their origin. So there's some really good stuff happening, but there's also some really bad stuff happening. So I have a couple questions for you. So when it comes to the equity of these sites, my question is like, you should always ask, there's a few questions as a planner that you should always ask yourself. And one of them is who gains and who loses from the situation. And what we're seeing a lot right now is there's a lot of development coming on, a lot of development interest coming in. And so the gains for that would be investors in development, the development companies themselves, the construction companies. These are like, they're gaining a lot from these moves. But you have to also ask the question of who loses out. And I'll talk about that in a little bit next time. So I want this to be a sentiment that you take back with you. Um, so I would say when we're pondering the equity considerations, these are the things that I like to keep in mind. And this is, again, another good example. So this is Milton Go. You can see that all the development is sort of circling around the station. It's all very walkable. It looks like a nice place to live with a station in the direct center. So I think Milton's done a really good job too. Um, but let's think about housing affordability. These are not marketed as bargain condos. These are luxury condos with, fancy amenities that not everyone can afford to live in. So there's a lot of pricing out the people who may have had walking distance to the station before, and now they have to live in the far off areas and walk through or take a bus through these fancy areas to get to the station. And let's make sure that those things don't get cut off. Another thing to think about is connectivity and permeability. So like, can you walk there directly, or are there a bunch of walls up now that you have to navigate around? Do you have to walk left, right, straight, left, right to get there, or is it a straight shot? Is it clear? Um, and then there's old versus new developments. The new developments will attract, let's say, younger families and young people. What about the older developments that were in that spot? Are we making sure amenities are available to them, or all the private amenities in the buildings like grocery stores, daycares, gyms, those sorts of things, only for the people who live in the building, even though the entire neighborhood has changed? I also think it would be great to celebrate transit in the neighborhood. You could make it part of the identity of the neighborhood. And the area that I live in is called the Junction in Toronto because we celebrate the fact that it has this history of being a place where many train lines came together. And I like that. I like that the street signs have little trains on them and things like that. It's really celebrating the fact that it has been a rail community. Um, but another thing to keep in mind is that there's a lot of political power that is gained from having a strong opinion, yay or nay, of these things. So one example of that, I don't know if you've heard of the 15-minute city concept, but the gist of it is that in a 15-minute city scenario, you can get all of your amenities that you need to get by in a 15-minute walk or a 15-minute bike ride from your home. So you don't have to leave and go far distances to go to get groceries. It's all within a sort of 15-minute catchment. That was picked up by some political leaders and has been turned into you're restricting us to only live within a 15-minute radius of the city. You've taken away our rights to leave. And that was never the intention behind the 15-minute city, but it has been postured as um, our rights are being removed and our freedoms are being removed, and we're not allowed to leave a 15-minute radius of our houses anymore. And that wasn't true, but that gained a lot of momentum. And it was getting a lot of attention online, and still is. So the 15-minute city debate is a fascinating flip-flop of the intention of that planning goal. And then also another thing to keep in mind is that political will is ephemeral. Like it comes, it goes, there's comes in waves. So there could be a lot of enthusiasm to get behind, let's say, a planning policy, but there's also just as likely potential to just wait it out until the next person's elected and not actually make any change. So that's an important piece as well. I would open it up now to if there are, I'm not an equity expert, so I'm sure there are some equity experts here. If there's anything that you think that is an important equity consideration for these type of buildings and developments close to transit and what that means, I would welcome to hear them in the chat. So please feel free. But yeah, I think the biggest one for me is pricing out the people who lived there and creating barriers for people to get to transit through this sort of luxury community that didn't exist before. So keeping tabs on that one and making sure there's housing affordability. Huge. It's a huge deal. Um, I'm kind of nearing the end of my presentation. I think I have two more slides. So first of all, I wanted to go back to this slide again and look at it with some new eyes. So I've highlighted the things that I want to bring our attention to. So in the vision, I know I said don't read it, but one of the things that the vision states is that we're going to build 1.5 million homes in Ontario by 2031. So who gains from this? Who wins this? Of course, people will find homes, but that's the builders, the developers, there's a lot of money to be made in that. So I think it's important to like be cognizant of that and to understand who gains from this. Like we're going to look to the future by building new structures. There's lots of other ways to look to the future. This is the one that the Planning Act has told us that we're going to do, and I think that's just an interesting piece. There's also loose language that you'll find in most planning documents. So maximizing the number of potential transit users, you don't have to make it walkable. You just have to have potential for it to be walkable. So keep an eye on language like that. The 150 to 200 residents per area, it's really just been focused in Ontario as building condos. It hasn't been focused, except for in Brampton, about building jobs. And there needs to be jobs as well. Otherwise, they're creating these sort of bedroom communities that leave, but where are they going? They have to go somewhere that you can get to on transit. And if your job is nowhere on transit, then it doesn't work. So there needs to be both jobs and residential, but you don't make a lot of money by making a bunch of industrial or office complexes. So we're missing out on the sort of destination side of that equation. And finally, um, we're going to transform these commuter parking lots into residential towers. That's great. But the transit agency relies on those commuter parking lots for many of their customers that, let's say, live outside of a transit radius or need a car for personal reasons or et cetera. Not everyone takes transit. And these commuter parking lots have been around for 30 years and people have patterns to use them. And if you remove those, let's say we have 300 cars, that's 300 customers that you might be removing that have to drive now without a consideration of what that means to those 300 people or those 300 daily fares, which is millions of dollars over a year. That's just wiped out of the transit agency, and they're all trying really hard to break even. So the money that gets made in this area doesn't go to the transit agency. And in some ways, it can pull away from the transit agency because you're taking out the sure thing of the commuter parking lot. And if you live by transit, research has shown only 2% of the people who intend to move into that building intend to take transit every day. The majority of people living in that building are still want a car and they want to take it on the weekends, maybe to go see a show, but they're not going to use it on their regular daily. So that's something else to think about. So really great policy has some problems, and it's up to smart people to sit down together and try to figure out like how we can do things right. So again, who gains and who loses is really important. And from one of my favorite shows, The Wire, everyone should watch it. It's such a great show. Follow the money. Always follow the money because it will tell you about the power that's behind these big decisions. So that's it for me today. Thanks for your time. I hope that you will reach out and have a conversation with me. You can find me on LinkedIn. Again, I'm Aubrey. I work at Arcadis, and it's a great place to work, focused on improving quality of life. And I'm excited for the rest of the session today. Thank you for giving me the time.
That was awesome, Aubrey. I do have one really quick question, if you don't mind.
Of
And this
course.
is more of a technical question. So, when you're calculating, for instance, how many people you want in a spot, are you looking at sort of estimated numbers for the future of like population wise for the area, like how the city's growing? Or are you looking at like what there is in the present? Because
This is
there
an
are kind of
excellent,
good and bad reasons for both, I would guess.
is an excellent question. The quick answer is it's for future growth. So they look at the growth plan looks at projections of not just where people live, but what is the immigration plan, what is the natural population growth, which is people having kids, and it ensures that the area has what's needed to accommodate those people. So it is a future looking um, forecast that you use to get the numbers of, well, we need 1.5 million homes. That came from, well, we want to bring in, I don't know, it's probably 2.2. So like 3 point whatever. There's probably something to do. 3.4, we'll say. I can't remember. 3 point something million people are expected to come by 2031. They need places to live. So I just don't know if they can all afford luxury condos. But that's sort of the spirit and intention behind it. But an interesting thing when it comes to modeling, because a lot of our work is like where are the people like of those, 1.5 million homes, how many are accommodated in this tower versus that tower, and there's a lot of I'll call it developers, a lot of people who are involved in these transactions that are saying, well, we're bringing all these people to this area, but they're kind of double counting because there is already a forecasted growth of that area. And then the developers will say, well, we're going to bring in 2,000 people to live here. But that 2,000 has already been accounted for. It's not net new, but it's being advertised as we're going to bring all these new people. But that means they're being pulled away from other areas of the city that had been planned or other cities. So you also have to be careful about those numbers so that they don't get double counted because it happens all the time. Like, we're going to bring 10,000 people into this area. It's like, well, 10,000 from where? We're only expecting 5,000 people. So where are you getting these people from? Because it makes their story sound very compelling that they need to get the permissions to build. And they need it to be really, really big because then they make more money.
That is fascinating. Thank you so much. I'll tell anybody in the audience who wants to ask questions, you can use either the Q&A. I think it probably just depends on how recently you've updated your Zoom, whether or not it'll pop up for you, or the chat. Either way, and then if Aubrey's able to answer it before she's got to go at some point, then we'll ask it. Okay. For now, we're going to move on to our first student presenter, Lucas. Lucas, are you ready to take the floor?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All
And
right.
sorry for me joining late. I was facing a lot of problems with my Google account recently, and yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course, no problem. You want to put up your screen in place of Aubrey's?
Yeah. Let me How do I do that? This
You
is
should
my
just be able to go down and share.
Oh, okay.
Same as always.
Okay. Am I currently presenting or
Almost. So you've got you
almost?
got to minimize your little Zoom screen, or else,
Oh,
or people
yeah.
will maybe see your face. If you can switch it to yours, that would work. But I won't be doing anything. I'll be boring.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Is this good?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay. So hello everyone. Yeah, my name is Lucas and I'm a rising junior and I want to present some today I'm going to present some things about um, my exploration of design philosophy and finding my finding my own like approach to architecture as a rising junior. So in this project, some of the key and main like focuses I've looked into was first design philosophy. So I looked into some texts regarding architecture and structural um, design in general and how it shapes cities and also lifestyles. And second, readings. I'll be talking a lot about how these different theories from these two books have sort of shaped me, but also how to incorporate it into your sort of own model. So in the end, I'll present a sort of model I've created, redesigning a local area in a local area. Yeah. And some takeaways, I hope to possibly share a new perspective on architecture instead of just being um, viewed as sorry, instead of being viewed as this sort of design branch focused on aesthetics, I also want to make sure to bring up the importance of function, since that is something I've learned with these rings and want to share it. So the first text I want to share, it's kind of this piece of text is more so for um like smaller age range. And though I would say it's sort of like started my journey as an architect, and it's called What Adults Don't Know About Architecture. So um, it talks about a lot on challenges on modern architecture and contemporary aspects. So if you were to say, if you were to bring up maybe Frank Wright and his sort of, oh, I don't have an example currently, but there's a lot of modern famous architects, which they're renowned for all of these crazy, unique buildings. This sort of book challenges the idea and sort of tells them to focus more on functionality and how the building itself shapes the lifestyle around it. So, um, and it also, yeah, it talks about the function and identity of a building or infrastructure. And some things that really stuck out to me was the book asking what kind of personality a building has, and what if it were to like have a conversation to you, what would it say? So for example, I tried to bring up a model. I couldn't really take any good pictures of the book, but there was this model I really enjoyed, which looked at this redesign of a highway. And on the left, you can see before it was changed, it was mostly focused on transportation and infrastructure, where the people and the cars are mostly separated. And it's sort of this um, very, I wouldn't like to say boring, but it's very bland, I would say. And then on the right, you can see how there's a lot of interwoven paths between like transportation itself, but also people walking and having those pedestrian streets, and also having these green areas that sort of brighten up the area in general. And going to the second piece of text, it's quite a famous one. It's Life Between Buildings. And in this book, in this piece of text, it focuses a lot on physical activity and how buildings and streets shape our daily lives. And it could be, yeah, separated into three distinctive lifestyle activities. The first being necessary activities. So that could be, yeah, going activities that need to be done in a daily person's life. So a lot of you might consider a necessary activity for you to be going to school or going to work. And the second category is optional activities. Optional activities is sort of activities that could only be met if a condition is correct or in the correct condition, if that makes sense. Um, yeah, so this could be ranging from sunbathing to watching the sunset and sunrise, or going for a walk since the weather is nice. And the lastly, we have social activities. So social activities kind of is a branch from necessary optional activities. It's basically what it kind of sounds like it is. It requires communities of people to be together, or at least a group of people to be together to have the opportunity to sort of develop and build that opportunity for the activity. And yeah, this some examples could be small talk with neighbors, playing with people at a playground, or hanging out with friends at a place. And there's also this sort of, since social activities is quite an umbrella term, this book also explores passive activities, walking, seeing, hearing other people, and how it sort of shapes a building's place. Since interestingly, there's a theory inside this book that talks about the more people in a condensed space, the more people will want to hang out in that space. And I'll see I'll try to talk about that later with my model. So yeah, I try to apply it into my own community, since I want to sort of not just read this piece of text, but I also want to explore it. So currently, I live on the other side of the world compared to like Ray and Aubrey. But so I live in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, and in this area, there's I would say the culture and the geolocation is really unique since it's a very tropical country, and I live in this area called Taodian, so there's a lot of international people, but um, since I don't know if you can see, but this blue line, this represents the Saigon River, which is the main river of the Mekong Delta that flows through um, Vietnam, and basically, to sum up all of the cultural aspects of it, the Mekong Delta basically forced Vietnam into having this um, messy, laid out, interwoven patterns of these streets, which is what I think makes this place really unique. And with that, it comes a lot of good factors, but also weaker areas um, in the Chaldean space, since there's not a lot of I would say modern city planning that goes into uh, Ho Chi Minh City compared to I don't know. Oh, sorry. Compared to maybe I don't know New York. And with this, I chose a specific area since Taoyuan is quite big, and I landed on this place called Trunkau area. It's this quite dense place filled with a lot of businesses. So there's a lot of small cafes and art studios, dance workshops, and also tutoring places. But it's also a place where a lot of people gather up and live. It's quite a highly populated density area, populated dense area for its square meter size. And but with that, yeah, like I said, um, Taoyuan faces a lot of urban issues, and one of it is since the tight congestions of people packed together, it creates a lot of issues with transportation, a lot of issues with um, sort of getting around Trunkau, that area itself, since the streets are so small and so packed together that it's it just makes a lot of daily life activities really annoying. And yeah, there's also it's really easily to be flooded due to it being near to the this waterfront. So continuing, I sort of since I live in the area or sort of in the Taoyuan area, I was able to have the opportunity to sort of go there and take some observational research and primary research. And I sort of, yeah, I took these photos of some urban infrastructure or elements that I thought was really unique, but also maybe some areas that I feel like that definitely could have been improved. So going back into what I said about a lot of people attracting highly dense places, attracting more people from everywhere else. Um, it's not really well represented in these photos, but you can sort of see here how since there are so many businesses in this area, like I don't know if you can see here, but this was a tutoring place, and since there are so many businesses in this area and it's not really separated between residential areas and social areas, um, it sort of creates this tight congestion between the two infrastructure elements. And so people living in that area who just wants to get along with their day might face a lot of traffic or a lot of people just coming in and trying to get to their, I don't know, art class or trying to go to their dance workshop. And it could also be, hmm, okay, it's not really obvious, but um, after this, I sort of looked into what makes Vietnamese architecture special. So, well, let me double check. If you go back here, you can kind of see it. Vietnam is very um, there's a lot of these houses called pipe houses. I'm sure there's also some other iterations from other countries, but in Vietnam it's called pipe houses, and it's sort of built for from the French colonialism and how it left this impact on um yeah here how since Vietnam at that time there was a lot of economical development. Even so now, a lot of people sort of built these pipe houses, and they became some, I think it was from a design, um, French design architecture aspect, and it's sort of blended with the Vietnamese, I guess, traditional architecture as yeah, if you've seen the history, Vietnam had faced a lot of international international, how do I say, international influence since, because of the history itself. And you can see some of the aspects. I made this mood board of some pipe houses or some images I saw online that I thought was really relevant and I could use to apply to create that authentic traditional um, Vietnamese style. Since in this project, um, I wanted to make sure that one, I sort of communicate the design theories I've studied. So with that being said, I wanted the this building sort of to have that blend of that internationalness of that French architecture style, but also having that Vietnamese traditional authenticity. And in doing so with that, I've sort of made these hand sketches. These are really just rough sketches and just me brainstorming since this was still during the planning stages. And I've basically looked at most of the design facades. So facades are basically these aspects and components that makes um, I guess a building special or unique. So I sort of yeah, inputted most of them into this page on my note, and it took a lot of thinking because one, I wanted to sort of convey my theories, but also two, also make sure that it's actually functionable. You can actually live in them. So I've tried to do a lot more urban aspects. So I've looked into how streets, the first book I've introduced, how streets shape people's lives, and looked and developed a lot on the overall infrastructure of not only the buildings themselves, but also how the area would sort of connect and make the transportation process better. So it's kind of really summarized here, but this is sort of my own designs. So, and I've separated between social buildings and outside buildings. And I don't have a picture, but um, in my original model, done I'd separated the area into. Let me see if I can find. So I separated the middle area. I changed it to be a sort of pedestrian walking street. So as you can see here with the wooden tiles laid out. And I've sort of created these elevated elevated walls that sort of create this canopy. And these are called arcades. And they're really prevalent in a lot of modern cities with a lot of rainfall. And I thought that would be really suited for um, this scenario um, with this area being heavily flooded and faces a lot of flooding from the heavy rainstorms in Vietnam. And in doing so, you can sort of see um, since it's also along the river, I also wanted to make sure that I'm able to sort of apply it into the same area. But I would say my models are missing quite a bit because I was not able to render it. So if it feels incomplete, then that's sort of the reason. And yeah, going into the more the aesthetics aspects of my designs. Um, these are the five main pipe houses designs that I built, and a lot of patterns in the facades you can see is that I've used a lot of bricks, um, oak wood, and a lot of um, these sort of wooden sheets. And by that, it sort of creates this layers in between the buildings since it was mentioned in the what adults don't know about architecture is that facades are really, really important for buildings. It aesthetically, it provides this sort of first impression that you have, and I sort of wanted to communicate that. So, for examples, just from the gates themselves, um, I've made them all very vertically based. So if you were to squint your eyes, you can see that there's a lot of vertical lines that sort of shows in a lot of traditional Vietnamese architecture, especially with wood being one of the main components of traditional architectural materials in Vietnam. And other design components that I would like to point out is also the sort of bricks. So it's not really seen, can't really see it, but since it's not painted, but there's a lot of these bricks since Vietnam, we use a lot of these sort of concrete materials to build the structure. And I wanted to sort of, yeah, connect back to that cultural aspect and have that cultural connection. And yeah, the last thing I would like to say is possibly maybe going back to the functionality itself. Um, I've tried to make sure that since it was separated between social and pedestrians, I've um, yeah, sort of try to apply that theory of necessary, optional, and social activities being so that these arcades can not only provide um, businesses this main road for pedestrians to walk on, but also to separate it from sort of the people living in that area so they could have that sort of their own personal space and enjoy their lifestyle. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Hoped I hope you've learned something or gained a new perspective on architecture itself. And yeah,
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was very inspiring and in depth. I like how much you tied in sort of culture and um, the way that people live their lives. I think when we hear human centered design, we don't necessarily really understand what it means to center something around humans, right? Like, is it
yeah,
what they want to do? Is it like, is it about their ideal dreams, right? Or like, what is
mhm.
it about humans? I felt like you did a really good job of explaining that. Thank you. If anybody has questions for Lucas, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. Now we are going to move on to Ray. The floor is yours.
Okay, hello. Um, Let me know if you can see this.
I can. It's perfect.
Okay, so yeah, my name is Ray Zhang. Today I'm going to be presenting about urban economics, and I am a rising senior. Okay, so first off, the guiding question for my presentation is how can cities be designed to maximize societal benefits while also reducing inequality and minimizing financial cost, and through a lens of urban economics and sustainable development. Okay, so first of all, just breaking that down, what is urban economics? So urban economics is basically the study of the behavior and decision making of people that live in cities and also corporations and the city government. And basically, the idea is you want to figure out how people make decisions, why they make the decisions, and how their decisions impact the city as a general. So, how do cities grow and how do they emerge and how do neighborhoods form? And sustainable development, specifically related to urban planning, is the idea that cities can be designed in a way that allows for both the current generation and future generations to benefit from the resources that are being allocated. Okay, so why is this important? So yeah, if you can see this video here, you can see that the number of people that are living in urban areas has been steadily increasing. And by 2050, I believe it's going to be about 2/3 of the population in the world. So because of this increasing urbanization, obviously it's necessary for people to prioritize urban planning, because urban planning is the idea of designing cities so that people can live there in the best way possible. And specifically, urban planning kind of looks at how governments and people can make decisions so that they can make the best communities possible and also improve the quality of life for each individual citizen. So urban planning kind of decides a lot of questions about the future of the city. So yeah, I've put some of them here, like will businesses choose to stay? Will the city grow economically? Will it decline population-wise? Is the city kind of split between many separate neighborhoods that aren't very well connected, or is the city very centralized? Is the city safe? And all of these basically lead to one big question is, do people want to live there and why? Because obviously if nobody wants to live in your city, that's not good. And the goal of any city is for there to be sustainable growth and for people to be incentivized to move to your city. Okay, so next, what specifically are the goals of successful urban design? So first off, sustainable population growth. You want your city to be growing, but you do not want it to be at a rate where you can't provide the proper resources and opportunities that are required, for your city to be prosperous. Economic development. This is a big one because you want to attract corporations and also businesses to be here so that your city essentially has the money for people, for you to build the infrastructure necessary to supply all the people that are coming here. And also, a lot of the reason why people move to cities is because of the economic opportunity that is provided by businesses being in cities in the first place. And efficient transportation, that's basically the way that a city is linked together, because obviously it can get very big. So yeah, sorry. Going back to that, just efficient transportation is the way that all cities can be linked together. And a lot of times now that means public transportation, because people have figured out that public transportation is kind of a way for all of these other factors of urban design to also be successful. And it creates a more integrated community than, the traditional car-centric design, which is, prevalent in a lot of America. And another big goal is equity, basically, because in cities, it's very easy for there to be inequality amongst neighborhoods, especially due to historical reasons. And yeah, when city planners do not prioritize the right things, it can often lead to inequality because there are only so many resources. And if there's no regulations on that, a lot of times the people that have already more resources are able to accumulate more and more. And finally, yeah, the sense of communities through public spaces, and along with that, cultural destinations and attributes that make the city unique. So these things are kind of not as important, but they're very important in that you want the city to kind of have a cohesive identity, and also for people to really want to move to your city over, other cities. So especially for the big cities, most of them all have something unique, or, many things that are unique about them. And yeah, over here on the right, I have an image of Barcelona, which is considered one of the best designed cities. You can kind of see this grid-like structure, which is present in a lot of cities, but also along in each box, basically, that's formed by the grid, you can see there's a lot of residential complexes, which means that it's easy for people to live there. And there's also this big diagonal road that kind of cuts through the city, and that means that usually, that road is used for better transportation and better access. Okay, so how exactly can the good goals that I just went over be achieved? So first, and probably the biggest concept behind urban planning in general, is this idea of urban agglomeration. And so basically, this is just the idea that cities people and businesses benefit from being near to each other. And this is kind of obvious because people need businesses to provide them jobs and to also provide them goods and services for them to buy. But obviously, corporations also need people to work for them and for there to be a demand for these goods in the first place so that people will buy them. And so there's also this idea of convenience, obviously, in cities, because when these things are close together, it becomes much easier and people love convenience. So that's why they will move to cities because they're closer to the things they need. And this also leads to this positive cycle because if there's more people, then there will be more corporations. And then because there's more corporations, there will also be more people and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's one big thing. And that's kind of the core idea behind how urban planning should operate. And next, accessible infrastructure. So this is also very important in reducing inequality because if the infrastructure is not in place across all places of the city and for all sorts of people, that means that certain people will not, have access to all of the benefits of the city, and that in itself is going to create inequality. So accessible infrastructure doesn't only, refer to like giving parking spots to disabled people, but also just in general, meaning making sure that no matter where you are in the city, you have access to all of the basic features and access to opportunities. So that can be public transportation, which is a very big one because in a lot of big cities, almost everywhere, there's going to be places where there's more public transportation and less. And obviously the places with more public transportation are going to benefit more because it's easier for people from there to go to other places and more people will want to move there. Also, general things like electricity, sewage systems, obviously those are all required for cities. And this is especially relevant in developing countries where these things may not be provided across all parts of the city. Also, walkways and crossings. So yeah, the quality of roads, walkways, and crossings is also very important. I feel like that's pretty obvious. And also public facilities. So parks, restrooms, and benches, those things all greatly improve the quality of life of a neighborhood. Also means that the areas, like residential areas near these public facilities, is going to be positively impacted. So these things are also important and should also be considered when essentially urban planners build a balanced city. Okay, so also incentives and nudges. So this is a big idea kind of behind urban economics. And it's this idea that individuals, when they're privately incentivized to do something, this can lead to societal benefit. And this is overall the goal of urban economics. And what I mean by that is that you can't just tell people to do something, move to a certain area, whatever. You have to incentivize people to do that, which seems pretty obvious. But this is kind of the core idea behind urban economics, is that you want to incentivize people to do something. So yeah, in order to encourage any sort of economic activity, any sort of project, expansion of neighborhoods, all the actors involved must be benefited in some way. Because yeah, otherwise, even if you pay people to do it, that's only going to get you so far. You want to actually change people's behavior. You need to actually give them incentives. So yeah, that can come in many forms, as I'll discuss later in the presentation. And yeah, next, legislative efficiency and proper regulations. So I feel like this is a big part of urban planning that is not really mentioned that much. But a lot of times, the problem with urban planning is kind of related to bureaucracy and the government, mainly that there's a lot of regulations that stop developments from happening or drive costs up so much that the people that were originally going to do it, lose interest, or the project becomes cut down to a point where all of the original goals no longer can possibly be achieved. So it's very important that there should be legislative efficiency, but obviously this is easier said than done. And then finally, an idea is transit-oriented development and sustainable design. So yeah, particularly talking about how cities can achieve their sustainable goals. One of these ideas is transit-oriented development. And this is basically the idea that you want to build mixed-use neighborhoods around transit centers. And so essentially in these small neighborhoods, there will be residential and commercial developments, and there will be anything you want. And all of that will be without the need for a car because you will be close to public transportation. And that really creates an integrated community. And also public transportation is obviously more sustainable than car-centric design. So that's something that's been very popular. And yeah, the photos I have here are of Copenhagen, and Copenhagen is considered one of the best designed cities, particularly for its green infrastructure. You can see here, in the top, there's a map of Copenhagen and with its green areas, and it's quite clear that there's a lot of green areas in Copenhagen. And also here, this is their idea for an energy plant located in the city, And you can see even that, which would usually be very polluting, they've tried their best to make it as green as possible. Okay, so now I'm going to be moving on to my case study, which is New York City, which is where I live. So yeah, here is a photo of New York from above. You can kind of see, this is Central Park and this is Midtown with all of the skyscrapers, and you can also see the grid layout, which is, New York is so famous for. Okay, so first off, an introduction to urban planning in New York City in general. So there are 5 boroughs, Manhattan, Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, and yeah, there's also the grid structure that I mentioned, which is, New York is kind of famous for, but obviously a lot of cities in the world also have a grid structure. But New York is known kind of for these very small, very dense grids. And the city also has a lot of vast historic infrastructure, and some areas are much more modern than others. And this is really obvious if you walk through New York City, especially in some parts of Manhattan. You can see there are super old buildings next to these new skyscrapers. And so the center of economic and cultural activity is in Manhattan. This is kind of what the world associates with New York, but obviously there's a lot more than that. And I believe, both Brooklyn and Queens have more people that live there than Manhattan. And yeah, finally, New York City is definitely known for its skyscrapers and these high density neighborhoods. So these are mainly concentrated in Manhattan, but there's just so many skyscrapers in Manhattan, and they're also really, really tall. So these kind of also define urban planning in New York City, because these provide a separate challenge or opportunity depending on how you look at it compared to many other cities across the world. Okay, so first off, public transportation in New York City. So this is kind of what I'm going to be looking at, because I think that public transportation, especially in a city like New York, is really, really important, and it kind of connects to a lot of the issues that we've been talking about, and it serves as a case study for how urban economics is involved in New York City. So a quick introduction is that New York City has one of the largest, most historic subway systems. As you can see here, there's so many stations all around New York. However, it's very outdated, and it's run by the MTA, which is under constant financial strain. They're basically losing money each year, and so they're unable to upgrade their infrastructure. And yeah, I've put here a lot of examples for the problems in New York, which are related to infrastructure, and you can see that they basically all are. So first off, delays, and yeah, so a lot of the problem in New York subways with delays has to do with the signaling system, which is very outdated and just inefficient, because each subway car often is too far away from other subway cars. But the problem with upgrading the signaling system is that in order to do that, you also have to upgrade the subway cars themselves. And a lot of the subway cars in New York are just decades old and aren't compatible. So there needs to be an upgrade to both the signaling system and the car system, which obviously is a ton of money. And then another issue is fare evasion. I believe the MTA lost, I think, 1 billion or something crazy to that last year, just to people hopping the gate. And so, the clear solution to that is more modern gates where people aren't able to do that, but obviously that's another cost. And safety issues, people have been concerned about, safety incidents on the subway. So a way to fix that would definitely be through better cameras. A lot of the cameras in subway stations barely even work, and also guardrails in stations, next to where the trains go. And that's kind of a feature you can see, I think, across a lot of East Asia, but it's just not here in New York at all. And flood vulnerabilities. So yeah, I have a photo up here of New York subways after a flood. Basically, whenever it rains a lot in New York, people know not to go into subways because they almost always get flooded. And so, yeah, that's also another big infrastructure issue. There needs to be higher street curbs. Basically, the entrances to the subways need to be redesigned. Obviously, there are so many, so that's going to be another huge cost. And upgraded pump rooms. So once the water reaches the subway, there also needs to be a better way for, the system itself to pump out the water. And that also needs to be upgraded. And finally, overheating. If you're in New York during the summer and you take the subway, you're going to know it's going to be super hot, especially in the stations. So yeah, the stations also need to be redesigned for that. So as you can see, there's just so many issues with the MTA and the New York City subway, despite how important it is, despite the fact that it connects all of the boroughs. And yeah, this is kind of just a part about urban economics, because there's just so many issues. They all have to do with infrastructure, and it becomes a question of how the MTA should make money, and also what their priorities should be, what they should spend it on for the goals of improving quality of life for the riders and just New York City in general. Okay, so yeah, first, one of the ways for New York City, for MTA to improve its financial state, which obviously is necessary for all of the infrastructure improvements it needs to do, So the first big one is reducing costs. So yeah, construction in New York City is currently one of the most expensive in the world, but this can be reduced through various measures, which I'm going to go through. And yeah, for example, Second Ave subway expansion, which recently happened and is ongoing, has featured extremely high costs. So basically, this is something that's been in the works for decades, but it's taken so long, and a lot of that has been to bureaucracy and really high costs once the project started. So the main sources of these high costs that can also be avoided is the fact that in New York City, there's this, because everything is so densely packed, whenever you try to build this big project, you have to talk to a lot of different people. You have to talk to the city, often the state, and even the national government, along with a bunch of private companies and homeowners. So that just becomes a huge issue where projects can get stalled for so long just because one party doesn't want to do that. So there should be, this is kind of one of the things where there needs to be a change in the laws and also, yeah, the regulations of this because it's just so slow and inefficient. Another thing related to reducing costs, specifically for the Second Ave subway, was the fact that there's too many agencies in charge of one thing. And because of that, every decision takes longer because you have to uh, check with people from all sorts of agencies. So there should be a more streamlined process. And this is particularly true for an MTA because the MTA receives funding from both the local and the state level. So it's technically a combination of New York City's government and the New York State government. And as you can imagine, that makes things very slow and complicated. And yeah, finally, another big thing associated with costs in New York is labor costs. There are just too many benefits essentially that are being given out to some of these workers, and also uh, unions can be a huge issue. Obviously, this stuff you want to preserve worker safety and workers' rights, but you also need to balance this with being reasonable and not having the project waste too much time. So yeah, there needs to be a balance with that. There should also be some more regulations on it. And obviously, some of this stuff is more political, but that's just kind of the nature of urban planning and urban economics, is that a lot of times it also has to do with the policy side. Okay, so now taxes and congestion pricing. So this is a way for the MTA not to cut costs, but to earn revenue. So yeah, this is already starting to happen. So the MTA has begun to implement other methods for gaining revenue, obviously besides the fare that you pay for going to the subway. And so some of this includes taxes from gambling and also congestion pricing. So congestion pricing, I don't know how aware you guys are, but there was kind of this big debate in New York City a couple of years ago. And basically the idea is that because Midtown Manhattan is this area where so many people are driving to, it causes a lot of traffic. And because of that, New York City decided to implement a congestion pricing zone, which basically means that you have to pay a toll every time you enter this area. And the idea is to de-incentivize people driving their cars and also uh, add a new area way for the city to make money. And so, yeah, some of that money has gone to the MTA, and this has been so far very successful. The MTA earned $62 million more than they expected from congestion pricing in New York in 2025. So it's been quite successful, and it looks like for 2026, this will continue. But another more controversial issue has been the idea of the MTA earning some of the money from the taxes from gambling. So New York City has, I believe there's already one casino somewhere in Queens, but there's been a lot of planned casinos you can see here on the map all across New York. And the idea is obviously that there's going to be a tax on these, and from that, the tax can benefit the MTA and the city as a whole. However, this also raises kind of a dilemma of sustainability and ethics, because most people would agree that casinos are detrimental to the community around them. Nobody really wants them in the area that they are. So it's one of those things where maybe it does benefit the MTA temporarily, but it might cause more harm than good in the long run. So that analysis for that needs to be done very carefully, and that's kind of one of the key areas of urban economics, where you can't only be considered about the short-term benefit of creating a casino, but you also have to consider the long-term implications on the neighborhood as a whole. And all of these calculations should be part of whatever you're doing for your economic analysis of any sort of urban planning project. Okay, and then finally, value capture. So this is something I wrote a research paper on, but I'll kind of go over it briefly. So this is inspired by the rail plus property model in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is known for one of the most modern and on-time, efficient train systems in the world, subway systems. So, and they're also known, especially for being very financially robust. unlike many Western transit systems, they actually make money. And so the question is, how do they do this? And the answer is the R plus P model, which is basically the idea that of value capture. And so value capture is the idea that whenever um, something like the MTR, which is essentially the transit agency of Hong Kong, builds a new station somewhere, then the area around that land becomes more valuable because obviously there's increased transit access. And so right now, in New York and in most places around the world, that access is that increase in value, which is considered the value in value capture. This value is captured by the private sector. It's captured by real estate developers who build buildings there, and none of it goes to the transit agency itself, which is actually funding the development that is causing this increase in value in the first place. So the idea behind value capture is simply for some of that value that's being created by the government or the transit agency itself to not only be given away to the private sector, but also for some of it to return back to uh, transportation, to the transit agency. And that obviously makes sense because then transit agencies like the MTA or the MTR have an incentive to build more stations and expand access around New York City in order for them, to earn more money. So the idea, basically, this can be done in a lot of ways, but it just involves some sort of way for payment to not only be given to the private sector, but also find its way back to the public sector. So this can be done through a tax, which is probably the most obvious way, but it doesn't give the most money. So, in any area that's considered to have benefited from a new transit station, the area would have an additional tax that would be given to the MTA. That's an idea. Or a lump sum payment. So that just basically means a one-time payment from whatever real estate developer is buying the land from the government around that area, and that money would be given back to the MTA, or some sort of agreement where the MTA kind of acts as a real estate developer as well, and they would make part of the money from the real estate developer then renting or selling. And that's the most complicated, but that's also the potentially most profitable way, and that's kind of the way they do it in Hong Kong. So New York City can do a similar thing. It's going to be more difficult. The easiest way is obviously a tax, but it is possible for all of these methods to be implemented and for value capture to be successful. Okay, so now I'm going to go on to, I have an interactive neighborhood map that I made. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to hear. Okay, so basically what I've made here is this interactive map that shows kind of the different factors that urban planners would consider. It shows the demographics, population. So you can see this is New York City, obviously broken down into the community districts, and you can see which areas are the most densely populated. So you can kind of see it's rather spread out. The most densely populated areas in Manhattan are the Upper West Side and Upper East Side, some areas of Brooklyn, and some areas out here in Queens, the Bronx, are densely populated. Okay, so then if you go to subway station complexes, you can see which areas have the most subway station complexes, and you can see it kind of changes. Most of the subway stations are concentrated around Midtown Manhattan, where people often commute in to work, and also in some of the more densely populated neighborhoods, also close to some airports. This is JFK, and this is LaGuardia. So then this is subway station complexes per 100K residents, and so this kind of gives you an idea of where the transit deserts are in New York, where the MTA should build more stations, and where transit access needs to be improved. So you can see that in Staten Island and also this huge area, much of the outer area of Queens and also parts of Brooklyn, there is very little transit access per 100K residents. And that kind of shows you this idea of income inequality and also just a lack of spatial equity in New York City. And then finally, median household income. So this kind of also ties into the idea that there is going to be equality. Obviously, there's going to be inequality in any kind of city, but your goal is to avoid this as much as possible. And this kind of shows you where in New York there is the most stark income inequality. And you can see that the highest incomes are concentrated in Manhattan and the area around it, and also some wealthy suburban areas. But you can still see that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that end. And yeah, my eventual goal with this is to add more factors so that you can really compare a lot of things that urban planners do, and also to add visuals of where projects are going to be. But yeah, my goal is to add these someday. Okay, so going back to the presentation, so the conclusion. So what is the goal and what should we do um, as an urban planner in New York City? So yeah, the first big thing is housing near transit. So as shown by, the idea of transit oriented development, and also kind of the idea of these transit deserts on, from my map, you can see that there needs to be an increased supply of housing near these areas that require more transit access. That's because people naturally are drawn to areas near train stations. And so if you don't build more housing there when you create a new one, then that's going to drive up the prices and create even more inequality. And often that leads to gentrification and displacing the original residents of the area where, yeah, you're building new transit access. And another idea is for mixed income neighborhoods. So I think one of the biggest things in New York City is that there needs to be more middle class housing. And what do I mean by that? So in New York City, a lot of, yeah, first off, just some context. One of the biggest issues currently in New York City is there's a housing crisis. And yeah, there's just a lack of proper housing. And there's a lot of debates about what we should do about that and why that's happening. So I think one of the biggest things is a lack of mixed income neighborhoods. So there's a lot of neighborhoods that are either super wealthy or very low income. And so for a lot of people that are middle class, they don't really have an option either way. And that also has a lot to do with current New York City projects, because a lot of projects have mandated affordable housing, but the rest of the housing is all luxury housing. So that basically means that the middle class is not benefiting at all from any of these new projects. And I think there should be a way for new projects to have different tiers of how much their rent could be, or how high their housing prices could be, so that there are different tiers, and so that it won't just be a few token affordable housing and then mainly luxury housing. And yeah, that also ties into another problem in New York City, is that a lot of the new projects are just mega skyscrapers, which are purely built for office, commercial purposes, or they're just built for extreme luxury housing. So those things, I think New York City should also have an obligation to make those, yeah, more affordable and not approve all of these projects. And then finally, zoning and regulation changes. So this is one of the big bureaucracy things. Another reason why there isn't enough housing in New York, despite there's obviously a lot of room, is because of zoning laws. And that basically it's just the fact that building housing in New York is actually super complicated. You often have to talk to, a lot of existing landowners. You have to buy property. You have to buy zoning rights or density rights from other developers, and it just becomes very confusing. Also, there's a lot of stuff that has to do with historical preservation, so you can't change too many things, or you have to use the same materials or something. So that just all drives up costs and means that building new housing takes too long. So yeah, these are the big kind of problems that need to be addressed and should be changed. But luckily, there is progress on that end. So some current initiatives include the City of Yes, which was recently passed, and this is basically an idea for there to be more affordable housing, and also for there to be more transit-oriented development in New York. So that's definitely a positive that New York City has recognized some of these things, and also that there needs to be zoning reform. So one particular example I think that I should highlight is very successful is Willetts Point. So you can see here, this was Willetts Point probably like 10 years ago, and you can see it almost looks like third world country. It doesn't look anything like New York because there's no paved roads, there were no sewers or anything, and it was basically this junkyard. So that area is currently being replaced by this new development, which is called Willetts Point. And you can see here, there's a soccer stadium that's being built, and also a lot of affordable housing. I think there's going to be a school, and yeah, it's next to the stadium for the Mets, and also Flushing Meadows. So it's in a very important location, and it's also near the subway station. So it's really great that New York City has kind of realized that there are certain areas that they can improve with urban economics and urban planning, and also the Go Win Green initiative. So this is another thing. This is somewhere in Brooklyn, and I believe they're redesigning the neighborhood to be more green. So this is talking more about sustainability, and they've figured out a way for to use the waterway, I believe, and for that to be not as destructive, because New York City is near the ocean and near the river, and they found a way to reduce pollution on that end. Okay, so that's it. Thank you for listening. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat.
Thank you so much, Ray. That was really awesome. I think you already know this, but I'm an upstate New Yorker. So I found it very interesting. I do think that New York is such a special case because it's like in some ways one of the oldest but also most modern cities. Like, obviously there are, places like Tokyo or something that kind of take it to a whole new level, but at least as far as the US, it's where you'll see some of the most like innovative zoning policies, and also some like intersections where you're just like, what? and you try to piece together the story of like, I wonder which building is the reason why all this is happening, right? Because you can always trace it to something. So I thought that was super cool. Thank you so much for sharing. And same to all of our other presenters. It was amazing to have you. I learned so much from all of you. I am putting in the chat my email. So if anybody wants to reach out with further questions, you can send them to me and I'll pass them on to the speaker you'd like to talk to. Any last words from anyone? All right. Yeah, Aubrey, please.
Oh, I was just going to say it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed hearing all of the presentations today. There's a lot of things that perked up for me in both of your presentations. So know that I was impressed and it made me think a lot, but I'm not going to spend a bunch of time. I'll talk to you offline about my questions.
I'm
Thanks.
sure I will too.
Yeah.
My brain's going. I found it also very interesting. So thank you all for joining the Leadership and Innovation Lab. You can go on our website, leadershipinnovationlab.org, and find out about any other programming that we have on. If you are maybe coming in as a family or a friend and you don't really know sort of the big picture. I hope to see all of these names at our next event in the attendees column. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Good evening.